Okay, we have pictures and we have sound. So
This is amazing.
This is amazing. I'm going to give an explanation for anybody who doesn't know, but we actually tried to talk a couple of times before, and there were tribbles everywhere, and there was all sorts of issues, and we had sounds and that. So this is our third attempt to try and actually have a chat about Star Trek and about beer. And the very first thing we're going to do is Vern here from the Federation of Beer is going to update us on what the current star date is.
Currently at 9 a.m. 36 seconds, it is 30056 or 30,056.505-707-76267. So because this is being recorded and will be a part of the history of the world, it is very important that we ensure that this is dated correctly.
Yeah. Just as a note, what's the start date of Stardate? Any idea how does it relate into calendars?
Well, the problem I have is I've drunk so much of the Star Trek beer I can't recall.
Fair enough. So listen, for anybody who doesn't know, first of all, I'm pretty sure everybody here or regardless of anywhere you've been in the world, you know what Star Trek is. And so what we have here is located in the town of Vulcan, believe it or not, is the Federation of Beer. And they produce Star Trek beers. So Vern, maybe just start. Vulcan is not another planet in this case. It's in Canada.
Yeah, the population of Vulcan, which is about 90-minute drive south of downtown Calgary, is just under 2,000 residents. Because of the unique name that's based on folklore, it was actually one of the names the Canadian Pacific Railway tied to a station that was required with the steam locomotives. Roughly every 10 miles, you would have to pull in and get water. So it was a source of water, and that's basically where the town of Vulcan originated. It was a railroad town. It's known to have 9 elevators in a line. Primarily what's interesting is Anheuser-Busch purchases a good majority of their wheat for international production of their beer from Vulcan County. It's one of the best barley growing regions in the world. And there's a lot of major malting companies located close by. There's Canada Malting, Rahr Malting, all through this particular corridor. So Canada is one of the primary exporters of base malt as well as specialty malts from breweries around the world.
Okay, but that isn't why Star Trek or the Federation of Beer is based in Vulcan. It's basically because it's Vulcan.
Yes. So what happened several decades ago when Star Trek was out and about, the local council figured it was logical, very logical, to approach CBS Entertainment at the time and request to be the official Star Trek capital of Canada. Now, Canada is not spelled the traditional way. It's KHAANADA. So it's with reference to, of course, Con. Yes. So in a nutshell, I didn't really know, because at the time I loved watching Star Trek, but I wasn't really following canon too closely, up to the point a friend of mine said to me, Paul Carew, he is one of our founders. One day he said, I'm going to do a presentation to the Alberta Council of Technology. We have a new technology to attract people throughout a Comic-Con to help the different exhibitors know and follow up with people that actually stopped at the booths. I ended up going to Edmonton to watch their presentation in a format similar to Dragon's Den. And they all arrived as Klingons. Their pitch was basically, after going to all these Star Trek conventions, after speaking to not only the actors and actresses, but also the vendors, it would be a wonderful thing to triangulate and thank the people that attended their booths, and so they could do a follow-up. So at that point, that evening we had dinner, and it was brought up that the previous year, the product that was being presented to the VIP function, the beer and the wine, wasn't up to normal standards. So as a beer importer, as well as a wine importer at that time, Paul said, you should contact Dana. She's in charge of Vulcan tourism, and possibly you can supply this year's product. And the rest is history.
Right. And that was like, at that stage, it was, you were bringing in what, like standard beers?
Yeah, the tourism center, of course, sells Star Trek memorabilia. They had a Captain Kirk bobblehead, as well as a McCoy bobblehead. And so what we ended up doing is we rebranded a Blaufränkisch wine, which is a red wine from Austria. It was organically certified, as well as kosher, as well as a Chardonnay from the Hafner winery in Austria. And on the flip side, I was working with Ankerbrau from Nordlingen, Germany, in Bavaria, and we had a traditional Bavarian Helles, as well as we didn't have a wit beer from them, so we sort of played with their traditional Hefeweizen for that evening.
And you just rebranded those then as, I think you told me it was
a
Vulcan
lager and the real McCoy wit. Yes.
And how long did it take you to come up with the names?
It didn't take too long because, again, there's 2,000 people that live in Vulcan. And Dana herself, after being immersed within Vulcan and all these various parades they've had prior to me beaming in, it was quite logical that Captain Kirk should have a lager. And of course, you've seen so many of the original series with McCoy in them. And as a deadpan humorist, it was a no-brainer at that time.
Right. And so from there, like how okay, so that was a one-off thing, though. How did it then become?
Yeah, it was a one-off. What happened after that is Dana suggested to us, she said, well, we're allowed to rebrand and do something for the VIP function. Why don't you guys contact CBS? Here's their number. And we were working with them in Toronto and New York. Why don't you approach them, see if you can brew beer in Canada, and so that next year we could actually have a properly brewed and branded product. Being in the liquor industry at that point for pretty much a decade, I reached out with Paul, and we found out that they liked the idea. Our pitch was a little bit different. We didn't want to take a macro beer and try and ship it throughout the world. We wanted to make sure all of our beers were unique, collectible, as well as well produced. No differently than the several series, of course, through the next generation, etc. And they liked the idea, so that's where it began. So the first year we only had rights to brew beer in Canada, and then after that we were able to brew beer. The license expanded into the United States in 2014.
Okay, so yeah, so on that point, I mean, yeah, Paramount are obviously a huge, that they're a huge company. So yeah, I mean, the easy thing for them, I guess, to do would be to go to some big conglomerate, someone like Budweiser, just take their example, and just tell them, just license the label. So what, that would have been their easy, straightforward, and I guess that's how most licensing deals are. Like, if there's money there, Budweiser would have paid them enough, and they would have just all done it. So how come they decided to go with someone small?
Well, if you look at it, when the first Star Trek convention appeared after the cancellation of Star Trek, it was put together by some of the stars, but mostly fans. It was a fandom event, and that particular event's been going on for decades in Las Vegas. And so I really think that the nuance of and the lore of Star Trek is it's inclusive, not exclusive. So you would often find a lot of various very creative people taking time to sew their own uniform, to do artwork, etc. As long as they don't sell the product, they're within the rights of producing something because it's in the public domain. Once you go out and actually sell something, you have to be fully licensed by Paramount Entertainment. So we didn't want to do anything that was improper. So again, we were able to reach out, and half of our people that started with us had attended some of the original Star Trek conventions. We had Richard Weger, and he's our token Vulcan, which is really, he's an actual veterinarian from the Calgary area. Again, Paul Carew, he is his group. We're all former Canadian veterans from both the Navy and Army. And of course, that does make logical sense to be a Klingon. So that's the history. Myself, my background, of course, was in beer distribution and importation, as well as wine, and we went from there.
Okay, so so how does it? Sorry, so I mean that makes a lot of sense. This wasn't the terms of like I said, you think of the big conglomerates, but then you think Star Trek is very much made of fans and small communities, and
Yes.
I mean, it's legendary that the community of Star Trek. I've never dressed up myself, but I like watching the series. I've never maybe taken it to that next level, but it's legendary. Yeah. So that obviously plays a big part, and is, I suppose, like the people in Paramount must be fans as well. So then that makes sense. We sometimes forget that corporations are made up of people.
Yeah. So when we designed our first beer, our second beer, first beer was Vulcan Ale. That was released in 2013. And when we began that process of launching Vulcan Ale, it was just sold at that point in Alberta. And it was a limited release, partnering in with the Spock Days in Vulcan. And then following that, we launched Klingon Warnog in 2014, timed that to the nightclub and bar show in Las Vegas. Both of those particular projects took several months to develop the label, to make sure that both labels that were within canon. One thing some people don't recognize, but normally anything that is tied to a television series and or movie, if you don't put a likeness of a star, the license holder can work with you directly. If you say you wanted the likeness of Spock on as a marketing tool for a Vulcan Ale, we would have had to go to Leonard Nimoy at that time. And in the future, now we would have to work with the estate first to get the rights to do something like that. So that's sort of the update on how this all started. If I take a look, our first day of product launch was on April 16th of 2013. On April 23rd, within a week, we announced that we would be in the Calgary Expo, which is a large Comic-Con. I think right now close to 100,000 people attend over 4 days. We were then picked up by CBC, Canada's national newscaster, on April 27th. And then on May 20th, we actually made the New York Times. Hugh Merlin actually wrote an article about what was going on in Vulcan. So trying to point out is, you don't know on a project how well it's going to be attended and or embraced. And within a 1 month period, what we started out in Vulcan, a small project to support Star Trek within the lore of Vulcan, had expanded internationally. We were starting to get calls from even actually Dublin all the way through to Hong Kong, saying, how do we get this? How do we get the beer? Right. And at that point, we really identified that this is going to be a lot of fun, and we should pursue the project with additional products, additional releases or episodes.
And how does it work now? You work, like you said, you work with local breweries. You don't work with, and I suppose local depends on the size of the market, and depends,
yes,
on what the thing is. But so how does it work? Is it all based around the conventions? Like if there's a convention on, that you work with a local brewery to produce the beers just for sale around the convention, or do you work with breweries to like have a brew available for 6 months, or what's the process on it?
Yeah, our preference is one and done. If you take a look at eBay, some of our empty bottles sell more than a full case of beer. So last time I looked, one empty bottle of Klingon Imperial Porter was being sold for $36. When we first sold a 4-pack in Las Vegas, it was like $15.95 for 4-pack with beer in it. So if you imagine, if we do this well, you could, as a beer collector, over time, in theory, it may become a very valuable part of your collection. And so on the what we ended up doing also, we recognized the beer market has shifted, and it's even shifted further away from regional or say national breweries to more of a localized level. We're a small group, and we have a half dozen Star Trek lovers, and we recognized within our first launch in Alberta that the most logical way of getting product into the market would be to identify a local brewery. Let's say in Halifax, we worked with Garrison Brewing. I was the sales manager for Garrison in Western Canada. I contacted Brian, said, Brian, here's an idea. He said, HellCon's coming up, let's do it. And it was a very successful event. We actually, I believe, were interviewed by all national newspapers as well as local television stations back then. And that's what we did with Schmaltz Brewing in time for the 50th anniversary Mission New York in 2016. And we also were invited in 2016 to be at the London Excel Star Trek Convention, 50th anniversary Star Trek. I worked for about a decade with a Czech brewery, Žatek, and that's when we developed the Syndicate Lager, the Orion Seductress, based on one of the original series episodes. And we sold out in Excel Center immediately. It was, I believe it's a 3-day show, and we ran out within a day and a bit. So these are things we try and do. We want to make sure that whatever's available in the market is fresh and basically the best that you can do.
Right. And if you're working with a brewery on this, then you already have some recipes and labels made up.
Yes.
And ready to go, and they're approved, because just from what you said, like just the label approval alone is a long process. So you have some that are ready to go, but yes. Can a brewery kind of work with you? Can they get their own like one-off?
Yes,
that is part of that series. Or
so good example. I think we talked last time, although everything had fallen apart electronically. The largest brewery we've worked with was probably Garrison Brewing in Halifax. It's been around for several decades in Halifax, as one of the original craft brewers in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We received a call in 2016 from Brewpub, Clock Tower Brewpub in Ottawa, which is strategically placed very near the Ottawa Fan Expo or Comic-Con. And they reached out to us, said we have an idea for a label. We took that idea. We worked with, at that time, the creative team in New York City, and we were able to develop a new label specifically for Clock Tower. We had, of course, it takes months to do that, but once that was done, the product was available, but it was only available in Ottawa during that period. They brewed a very small quantity. I think it was like 30 hectoliters, right? So often what we find is, depending on the scale of the project, normally a brewery that can brew multiple batches but ferment, say, 60 hectoliters, that's sort of the sweet spot for a smaller release. And maybe before Christmas, we would work with the same brewer, have a different label, hopefully, and then produce a little bit more just because of the festive time period. But generally speaking, most of the product that we do brew, we want it pre-sold before it hits the market, so that it basically beams in and beams back out.
Right, and that's where having a specific event obviously focuses everything, because you have...
Yeah, you've got A good example. Yeah, you have people flying from around the world to go to the San Diego Comic-Con as an example. We've launched there before, the New York Comic-Con. So, when you've got 250,000 people coming into a location, quite a few of them follow Star Trek. So if you're really going to be sharing the love of craft beer and Star Trek, it does make a lot of sense to identify certain events where everybody gets together. It's a lot more fun when you're drinking with somebody else.
Yeah. Well, much more recommended than on your own, I think.
Yeah.
Doctors would agree. Yeah, so, but, and then the labels, just coming back to the labels there. So, and the collectible nature of this. So, say, which one did you mention? What was the lager you mentioned there a while ago? You had Engage, was it?
Actually, I'll go through a couple of things. Our slogan is basically, we're boldly brewing where no beer's gone before. A little backtracking to when we went to launch our beer at the Nightclub and Bar Show. John Taffer from Bar Rescue, that's his show. He's the showrunner. And we were able to make use of a prototype bar pod that was developed for Anheuser-Busch for Super Bowl. Anheuser-Busch was going to see how it would work. We were given the opportunity to choose the anomalies. What we did is we brought in 16 different beers, and we asked the 250,000 people of the convention to choose your anomaly. And we did have Klingon Warnog there. When we were there, a lot of the people from NBC, CBS were there as well. That weekend, just after the Nightclub and Bar Show, we were put on Saturday Night Live, where Klingon basically was up and running and promoting our product, which is pretty cool. And Conan O'Brien on the Friday evening also poked fun of it. He said, this particular beer is one that most Klingons would drink alone. So I guess people are also asking the time, because we did at that time period launch the Klingon Warnog. Why we chose a Rogan Dunkel. Well, first off, it sounds pretty rough. And they were also asking, because even back then, a lot of people were homebrewers. They said, well, what was your malt bill? It was rye malt, and we used a modern Dunkelweizen grain bill. So what that allowed us to do is the Warnog had a aroma of basically blending of rye malt and the traditional clove character of standard Bavarian Hefeweizen yeast strain. And because it had a rich and unique flavor, and it had both wheat and malt characteristics, using both wheat and rye malts and caramel malts, it turned out to be very successful. You think that's all you had to do, when that was basically within our news release. It was picked up within a couple days by the Guardian newspaper in the UK, where a Star Trek lover took it and he said the following: a real Klingon would probably be more into blood and steel flavors, something that tastes more like victory and less like wheat. So all I'm pointing out is why not? This is within 1 year. Seriously, this is within actually less than 1 year. This is 11 months in. We had just received the rights to start brewing in the United States, and this happens. You can see how much fun we were having. Yeah. And I think the reason I had to go through that is in the last 6 months, we've been working with Viacom, Paramount Entertainment out of London, England. We found, because we were only brewing at the first iteration of Federation of Beer within the United States and Canada, anytime the Star Trek convention in Las Vegas, or say the New York Comic-Con, popped up, it was clearly evident that a good portion of the consumers beer lovers were from Europe and Brazil, locations like that. We began negotiations earlier this year, and we've formulated 3 new beers. One of them is using Galaxy hops, and it's a Galaxy Class Ale. We call it an extraordinary ale, and as you point out, it's Engage. The Engage project will allow local brewers to work with us and put some component of profit towards a local charity, like a food bank. I know in what we're going to be doing on our Engage launch here in time for the Calgary Expo, which is in late April this year, we will be working with the Calgary as well as the Airdrie food banks and the Vulcan food banks to donate some of the profits towards, it's been a tough time with inflation and everything else. So if you know any of the brewers in Ireland or any place else listening to us right now like to do something like that, we'd be happy to put your logo with our logo on a label and ensure that people know it's a one batch to support a local charity.
Right. So that would be, just so we're clear for the brewers who are thinking about this, I mean, that would be, they would brew the recipe you have in their local market. They have no competition there. And it would be the only Star Trek beer in the local market, obviously.
That's correct.
And events.
Yes. And generally speaking, we wouldn't want anything we wouldn't want to brew more than, say, 1,000 flats, as an example, because we have multiple labels. Over time, we could work with that particular brewery to do 2 or 3 releases a year. We don't want to saturate the market, but we do know that by strategically putting different styles of beer into the market and not flooding a market, it goes very well. And
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I mean, that fits a lot with the craft beer, where there's always something new coming up. You know, they might have a small core range, but breweries
and retailers, and be candid, it's a saturated market right now, so retailers can only take some in. We started doing our pre-sales for our launch in Alberta. Majority of the retailers are coming back to us between 2 and 5 flats. So if you do produce 500 flats, you will likely have to be in 200 stores. Just throw a number out there. Bars might buy 2 or 3 flats. So the old days where you could get a stack of beer, say 20 flats into one location, they're long gone.
Right. Yeah. And this, I mean, as you say, like, I mean, the big problem for most brewers is that shelf space and getting that, because everybody's looking for something new, and that it's just purely, people aren't buying beers, or at least a large portion. They're going, let me phrase this as kind of the untapped view. They just tick it off. They have to have a new beer all the time, and it's just picking something based on a second's look on the shelf. So Star Trek obviously jumps out there, and that collectible element as well.
Sorry. We were looking into possibilities of having, let's say, a core brand, and what you're pointing out right now is what the market's shifted to hyperlocal, as many releases you could possibly do, which means in the province of Alberta, when we first started releasing products, there's roughly 2,000 beer listings. There's now 10,000 beer listings in Alberta. There's no more liquor stores, and it's not like an accordion. You just pull the accordion open and put more beer on new shelves. It's bricks and mortar, right?
Yeah.
So these are just things that I'm sure in Ireland and other locales in Europe, people are feeling the same thing. One of the brewers I talked about earlier, when we did the first convention in 2013 using Anchor Brew, it was a 400-year-old brewery. And it was actually Quebec City and Anchor Brew shared the same date of founding, which was in the 1600s. And unfortunately, the brewery was recently closed in the last 5 years. So when a brewer in Bavaria has to close because of competition, and being an old brew house, actually I talked to the general manager of Jatec. They're building a new brew house and a new brewery just because the old breweries are inefficient compared to the newer technologies that are available. So there's a lot of flux in the market, and I'm sure you have stories of people that have been in the market for several years. Schmaltz Brewing, that worked with us for a New York release, is no longer in business, and it's tough. It's very tough for a lot.
Over here, I've just seen 2 in the last week that are just announced they're closing down. I mean, I don't know what it's like over in Canada, but like the energy crisis here is just, the cost of energy has gone through the roof.
We're fortunate, especially in Alberta, because we have the largest oil reserves in the world outside of Saudi Arabia, and we also have one of the largest natural gas fields. Our provincial government in the last 6 months actually canceled all fuel taxes. And what they basically said is if the cost of a barrel of oil goes beyond $80, then you don't pay anything if you're a consumer. And I think there's more and more people looking at that. The real income in Canada has not increased in the last 30 years. You might be making 3 times as much, but you're paying more than 3 times when it comes to purchasing a house or paying rent. And I know, speaking with several brewers in the last few months, including we were interviewing with Yuri earlier this week. When you're having brownouts, blackouts, you can barely heat your home. How do you brew a batch of beer? I really feel for the people, whether you're in Africa or Europe, what's going on in this world. I talked to my dad before he passed in July this year, and he couldn't give me any guidance at the age of 82. And he's a very worldly man himself. So it's very difficult. I don't know what to tell my son or daughter right now.
Yeah, no, and yeah. So, I mean, like, as we said, there are breweries and it is tough, but so then, like, what does, let's bring that back around. So, and be kind of crystal clear. So what does a brewer get out of working then with the Federation of Beer? Like what do you think the advantages are for them are?
So the process is fairly simple. So we at the Federation of Beer identify that we would like to brew in, I'll just use Ireland as an example. Because I worked in the Brew for Ukraine, there's several breweries in Ireland. We've done full collaborations with Brew for Ukraine. So learning that several breweries can get together. We're all into, if there's a Brewers Guild, that maybe we do work with a Brewers Guild, especially understanding the economic situations with the high cost of heating, etc. And what that does is it also allows for a better dispersion of the product. So if you have, like in Alberta, it's roughly 300 kilometers between Edmonton and Calgary. If we choose to brew at one of the facilities, but you have the sales and marketing team in Edmonton distributing to the Edmonton stores, and the same with the Calgary brewery in the Calgary stores. Once the product's released, it can be into the stores within 2 or 3 days, right? Under a pre-sale agreement. So I think going forward, we'll be working with more brewers guilds. And on the flip side, we'd like to share some of our recipes for home brewers as well, similar to what we've done with the Brew for Ukraine.
Right. And then, so that would be, like I said, a guild, a number of people coming together. Would that be a case where they could all brew smaller batches individually, or one person taking the lead on the brewing the batches? Or
so let's throw this out here. If it's like a Christmas variety pack, a good example in Gage is using a Galaxy class hop. There's other hop varieties, Comet, is a lot of the hops are actually named
space themed,
space, stars. So there could possibly be an opportunity for a few brewers to get together, take the base recipe, and all you do is change up the dry hopping using a different hop profile. So we want to be creative, but we also have to respect the amount of time we have to put a project together and the amount of time it takes to get any label change, including just adding a logo of a brewery partner of ours or manufacturer working with us. It's not instantaneous. Every label change must go through Paramount Entertainment's legal. So it would have to be, because we're working in 85 countries, our preference would be taking one of our existing recipes. But I do know that I'm working with a brewer in North Carolina right now. It's a tweak on one of our existing labels showing the Star Trek Enterprise on it. Just different colors is what they're hoping to do for backdrop, etc. So that may not take too long. But some of the very creative ideas we have may take a little bit longer. So what happens is, let's assume that a brewery says we're going to make 500 flats and we're going to sell each master carton or flat for, say, 100 Canadian dollars or 75 US. We take that calculation, and that becomes the gross revenue to the brewery. We then have to take a royalty rate, which is roughly 20%. And that particular percent then is sent back to Paramount. And from that point, once we have the label approved, the revenue, the net revenue that for that particular project stays with the brewer. So it works easiest that way because we have several breweries we're working with, and we don't want to send an invoice out and chase after somebody later, because our focus is on broadening the bandwidth versus chasing after $2,000 or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So, but does that? I'm just thinking, like, because obviously the brewer, then there's a bit of a, there's a bit of a risk. It probably, like you said, it's collectible and it'll get a huge amount of publicity. So it's probably a very minor risk. But if they were worried, like, does that license cover a particular period of time, or can they?
It's one batch. Yeah. So how it works is
they could take a year to sell that, and they'd be okay.
Well, I don't want the brewer to say they need to brew a certain amount. If they come to us and say we're going to brew 500 flats, and that's sort of a normal batch size, at least in Alberta. I don't want them to come to us to give us that forecast. I want them to have a solid pre-sale. So if we have a memorandum of understanding or expression of interest, we understand that the label is going to be looking like so-and-so. Then at that point, we would ask the group or a group of brewers or the brewer to go out with their sales force and pre-sell the product. So if 80% of the product's pre-sold, say 400 flats out of 500, their risk is negligible, very negligible.
Right. So that would be before they hand over a cent or anything.
Yeah. So this is no different than online sales groups. Often, like Tavour, will have a broad, say, thousands upon thousands of craft beer lovers in the United States, around the world. They say we're planning to do a McKellar release, or we're planning to do an Evil Twin release. And everybody puts their pre-orders in. They can then feed that information back to the buyers as well as the brewer, so that there's adequate stock on that launch. So these are just tools that are available to us. If you came back to us 15 years ago, it would have been a lot more difficult. Now we can gather this information and directly from the consumer, which is tremendous. So maybe going through one of our other brands that we're going to be, there's some issues here I think we talked about before. Our next product is going to be called the Trouble with Tribbles. The problem we have with Tribbles is they get everywhere, including our Belgian beer glass. It's going to be a triple. And like Tribbles, too many can be troublesome. It's going to be a higher alcohol product. And I think in the big picture, on something like that, it is something could be cellared because it would be a Belgian triple. So our preference often would be as in imperial stout and stuff like that. So if somebody comes to us and say we want to do this, then we often would work with them, and so the product would be cellarable, right? So there's all types of things we got to listen to the market. And the best people to listen to in the market are the ones we're working with on a local level.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking while you were talking there, like, I see a lot of collabs going on with brewers and distributors. I've seen off licenses doing collabs. Now, I don't know how much input the off license had into it, but they get on the label and obviously they stock it and they do it. Yeah. I could see something like that, or a supermarket chain or someone who does that, working very well on that sort of thing. Like, they have the space, they work with a brewery and they both get on the label or something, Yeah.
So it's interesting. I can speak on behalf of one of Canada's largest grocery chains. I think the second largest. It's Sobeys. They're based out of the Maritimes, and they purchase Canada's Safeway, so they've expanded tremendously. When I first started working with them on Star Trek beer release, which was in 2013. They said it's in all stores. Now what they'll do is they'll say, look, Vulcan's nearest to Calgary. we have limited shelf space. We'll tell you what, out of the 100 and some odd stores, we're going to put it in 25 stores, right? So again, you have to work with your client, which is the retailer, as well as the brewer, to understand how much beer is profitable to produce. There's no sense producing something to sell at a loss. It's not good for you or me. To have skanky beers, sometimes people would say, or there's dust on the bottles. It's not what we want.
Right. So yeah, I mean, again, that comes back to what you were saying about, Paramount willing to work with smaller groups with this model. It is back to, I don't know whether it's because they're very protective of the Star Trek brand, or like you said, there are people who like beer as well, and they're willing to. They're not trying to, let's use the word, they're not trying to screw this, and like they're not trying to squeeze everything out of the golden goose. They're willing to.
And again, the market, it's restricted market because it's alcohol, and because distributors have no space. And that's probably not in Europe as well as South America as well. It's very difficult to get the wholesaler to get the product into the retailer. We don't want to create something that, let's put it this way. If you take a look there, if you watch Deep Space Nine, Quark's quite famous to say there's always a profit motive, and profit is good, right? So outside of how they normally look at profit, what we try and do is take a look at the three partners. We're the licensee. We are responsible for the license. We go to a manufacturer, which is the local brewery, and decide with the local brewery how much you can produce profitably working with us. We have to get our cut. Our cut then is shared, of course, with Paramount Entertainment. We want all three parties to be profitable. And we also want to put some of the proceeds on some of the releases to help support things like food banks. And our expectation is, based on the inflation and everything else going on, most of the breweries will probably want to put aside some portion of their investment back into the local community.
Yeah, and community, I think that again is coming back to, brewers. It's always, they're always encouraging people to support local. So if they're supporting local as well, everybody benefits out of it. So just to track there, because I think you mentioned it, but I didn't maybe pick up fully on it. The time frame on this, like if someone came to you tomorrow and say they wanted to go with your existing recipe, or they wanted to go with something completely new, what kind of time frames are you talking about?
Well, I guess if things work out perfectly, often some of the retailers have a planned seasonal launch program or limited release launch program with their existing local brewer. So a good example is if it's being incorporated in an annual plan where a lot of the shelf spaces are a token. They can come back to us and say, we're going to plug this into our marketing plan. We know we always sell this much. We think, this is a comfortable amount we're going to sell. We've taken we'll share the labels. Which one do you want to do? We like X label. Maybe they want to do Captain's Lager as an example. Okay. So because we have the core label already produced, likely the shortest time period, based on they know how much is going to be sold, they already know, be able 120 days. So you have to look at the product labels take time. There has been a backlog of label timeframes. I know that if you're wanting to put the product into a carton, there have been shortages of carton materials of all things. Things are improving. Of course, there was a can shortage recently. I can speak because I'm a part of the Brewers Alliance buying group. We have over 300 members throughout North America. If you talk to us last year, this time, the ability to get cans, labels, everything produced, sleeves for canning, was tremendously much longer than it was prior to the lockdown. So things are improving. The ability to purchase bright cans to put labels on is much better today. If one is a larger brewery and they want to do a printed can, we used to, our Vulcan Ale as well as our Klingon Warnog were in printed cans. And all we had to do is buy one truckload of printed cans going back 10 years ago. Today, well, up to recently, the minimum was 5 truckloads of printed cans. What's now happening in the market, because there's additional supply coming on, when you're part of the buying group Brewers Alliance, now the printed can quantities for minimum runs are back to where they were before. So again, it comes down to, is one putting a label on a bottle, because the bottle product, it may be a little faster than purchasing sleeves, having cans sleeved and then shipped out.
Right.
But 120 days, and if somebody wants to work with us on an actual label for, say, Christmas of next year, I think we could fit that in. However, if the plan was launching sometime prior to June, it may be a stretch to say that could be possible.
Right. Okay. So, yeah. So, I mean, this all, it's a fascinating thing. And like I said, what I'm really impressed with is the way it's kind of, it's not just a license to a big group and they just flood the market with kind of, you know, a macro beer. I really like the way.
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt, but a good example is Edmonton Comic-Con comes up after the Calgary Comic-Con. So my preference would be in Alberta that we would do a single batch, partnering with a group of, say, brewers in Calgary or one brewer in Calgary, run out, and then a couple months later, possibly do a different label, or it could be the same label, but working with a brewery that's been around a long time, possibly like Alley Cat in Edmonton, or there's tons of breweries in Edmonton might want to do a project like this. So again, the key business component is we do not allow the beer to be shipped outside of a jurisdiction. So if a brewery in New York State is launching for the Albany Comic-Con or the New York Comic-Con, they are not allowed to distribute that product outside of their state. And that gives us an opportunity to work. Good example in Nova Scotia for a Comic-Con, Quebec for a Comic-Con, Ireland, UK. The Scots might argue differently, but we would have to look at that. And then the other countries. So we've already got interest in, as we spoke a bit before, in Lithuania. And we're already talking to a Comic-Con in Lithuania. And I have approached, based on some of your recommendations, to brewers there to see if they want to work with us. Yeah, it's right for them to get back if they're interested.
Yeah, there's another one actually I'll give you afterwards. I thought of afterwards. Might be useful. But yeah. So just bring it back, because that thing about the labels, the collectibles. So like these are very much a collectible thing that people go. So each label, as you said, is different. It has the brewer's thing, so that it is, and obviously for a collector, they can see which episode it is and who brewed it, and they could have the whole Captain's Lager range across.
You're correct. Yeah. Okay. So, and it will be in the because we'll be shipping product in, say, Lithuania. It's not like it's going to only have English on it. So part of the collectability, of course, is have different languages. Whether it's Portuguese or Spanish or French, predominant on the label. That's another. If you take a look at the Star Trek, history of Star Trek is getting all of mankind to work together and not to fight. So to me, it would be interesting, as you're pointing out, if you have a Captain's Lager brewed in Canada, and you have a Captain's Lager brewed in Ireland, you've got a Captain's Lager brewed in Lithuania, Poland, and each one has its local story and each one has its local language. That'd be pretty cool to have up on a shelf.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And so, like I said, this works in that sometimes you approach breweries, sometimes brewers approach you, but I guess you could have some group, like you said, a charity who thought that this might be useful could come to you. That's and right. talk to a brewery. Probably they talk to the brewery first, a local brewery, and they wanted to have some big event. Like you've kind of addressed this already on the size. I'm just thinking, like, I wouldn't work with they were having just a one one night event that need to have something bigger.
There's only so much bandwidth, as we spoke before, and it does take a lot of time to get a project. So a good example is this: we can't simply create a event poster with our label and things on it. The event poster actually has to go and get approved from Paramount Entertainment Legal. So it does take time. So we have a good group of volunteers basically within our system. We don't make a hell of a lot of money, let's put it this way. It's more of a passion project. I have another business I do a lot of consulting in, but by doing it this way, we really think that we're being inclusive, not exclusive, when it comes to, again, sharing a project with as many people that are interested in sharing it with us. Again, we're the licensee. So rather than have a regional or national manufacturer, our process is working with local manufacturers, if you want to look at the way it's done. So we're not going to say China, bring tons of beer and then shipping it around the world like clothing. It's more or less finding an artisan apparel manufacturer, let's say in Ireland, and working with them.
Right. And do most of the brewers, just correct me there, are most of the brewers you've worked with so far, are they doing it, do you think, mainly for the business side of it, or do they all turn out to be big Star Trek fans?
It's a combination. I know Brian Titus from Garrison was one hell of a Star Trek fan, and Jeremy Cowan from Schmaltz, when he was working with us, they knew more about Leonard Nimoy than I did. Jeremy, if I remember correctly, was a distant relation to the Nimoy family. So you find these things. It's, as we spoke earlier, it is the Kevin Bacon rule. You don't know who knows who. I met at the Emerald City Comic Con in Seattle in 2016. I met Denise Crosby. And she was, of course, originally a series member. And I'm not kidding. What happened is we sat down. She said, I haven't tried your beer yet. It was like 90 degrees outside. We cracked open two cold Vulcan ales, sitting outside in the shade just to sort of cool off, talked. She says, I love craft beer. She says, are you going to do anything in Iceland? I go, do something in Iceland? I said, sure, I guess I don't have the rights to do Iceland, but in the future, maybe. So she said, I did the Iceland Comic-Con. It was a blast. I highly suggest you work with Gatinger Brewery. It's a brew pub in Iceland. Although we haven't brewed with Arnie at all recently for Star Trek, we hadn't done it yet because we didn't have the rights to do it. I actually was able to import some of his beer into Alberta through that relationship that was built. So it's amazing to see. I should probably go back to, the first batch of beer we released was in Vulcan in 2014. And we met Rod Roddenberry there. He was unveiling Gene Roddenberry's plaque. Initially, he had showed up. I just set up the VIP room, getting back to all the beers we were doing. The rest is history. Basically, he was very appreciative of the quality of the products that were available in the VIP function. In fact, several Klingons were having a party in joint rooms. They invited Rod, myself in to join them. They were having their own version because they're all Navy guys. I think we talked about it earlier, but I might as well go through this. They brought a clean American Standard toilet bowl where they filled it with grog, let's put it this way, and forced everybody to drink out of the toilet bowl. Rod had brought in a full case of the White Rabbit Chardonnay we rebottled, which was that organic kosher wine from Hafner. About 3-4 in the morning, the party was over, but at 7 in the morning, my kids had me out of bed, and we were having breakfast in the hotel. And at that point, Rod comes up and says, "Can I join you guys?" I was feeling crappy. and Rod looked like nothing had ever happened to him. So every convention I bump into Rod. We've had the ability to sit down and talk to Connor Chenier from Voyager. Connor can't take gluten. He's a celiac. So in the past, what I've done is brought in from other friends in the industry, kombucha or gluten-free beer. I represent some gluten-free beer brands here. And so if he comes to our hospitality room at the Rio Casino in Vegas, that's where the Star Trek convention is annually. He can sit down on a bed with Ira Stephen Bear and his wife and several others. And we don't talk Star Trek. Half the time we're so tired after working the event, we're just drinking beer, which is pretty cool.
Right. Well, you've kind of told me. I know you're planning this one in Lithuania in October, so I'm hoping that maybe I'll be able to get there and experience some of these stories.
Well, Brian, I think the most important part is we do need quality assurance testing prior to release. So I might have to get you there a couple times. I might have to leverage your capacity, or possibly, I think you said your wife is from there. So maybe it's one of your relations that you can trust not drinking all of the product. We have to limit the ration. So, we haven't really talked about the Captain's Lager, but it's a special ration for some of the, people that deserve it. The Captain's Lager is a special ration. So we'd have to make sure that the protocols are being met.
All right. Protocols are important. Listen, it's a fascinating subject. And yeah, it's just the way it's gone about. And hopefully, you can see, just from those stories, even I think you mentioned before, some of the brewers, they had, they got the local Star Trek fans were dressed up as Klingons mashing in and that. So I could see, for a brewery, if you have any interest in Star Trek, it could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, if you go to, I think I have a photo on our social media, I think on Facebook, and there's other photos. But the group that I spoke about before in Vulcan that forced me to drink out of a toilet bowl, basically, they're actually from the Navy of Canada, many of them. And when they heard that Garrison Brewing in Halifax was about to launch a beer, the timing was perfect. They headed out for the HalCon convention. Just prior to that, they took the opportunity for a photo op, as you're pointing out, mashing in actually on a brew while they were there. To me, the photos I see there that they shared with me are iconic. And so every time we travel somewhere, we're going to meet somebody that is very creative. And put it this way, we really don't need movie stars to pitch our product. Fans do.
Yeah, no, I can see. I mean, there probably is no other fan group as fanatic as into it as Star Trek, and it is legendary. So so maybe look, hopefully that's covered everything. Is there anything we should have chatted there that we missed? Because we've had these kind of half chats before, and I'm wondering which ones we missed and which ones we covered.
Well, today I think we covered more of the process of how we go about brewing beer. But I think in the big picture, if any of your audience that listens to it has an idea for a style of beer or episode, often where we go to, when our new episodes were often from suggestions from fans. Our website, if a person says, how do I get a t-shirt or a mug? Our website has been reopened now, so it's available. We're shipping out of Brazil, Europe. I believe we have different fulfillment centers in UK, of course, in Europe. So if anybody is looking to purchase a gift item for a fan, that they can do that today. We are working on a First Nation or Indigenous episode from one of the series. As an example, a suggestion was sent to us in the last year, and we took note of that. Of course, reconciliation is important everywhere in the world. Working with Yuri at Pravda, it's unfortunate what's happening in Ukraine, and there will be in the future a requirement for reconciliation there. So anything that is based on an episode of a Star Trek series that somebody thinks is unique and has a good storyline, I ask anybody just to send us a quick email with a thought on that. Often what we do, we will be doing an internal discussion. And if we think there's a possible fit, we'd be very happy to say, thank you very much. I think we've got something we're going to be working on into 2024.
Excellent. So, and that is federationofbeer.com.
Yeah, federationofbeer.com. And if one wants to buy a t-shirt or see some of the artwork we have in place currently, we'll be launching some new artwork in the new year once we start releasing the Engage, Captain's Lager, and Trouble with Tribbles beer styles that are coming out in the new year.
Okay, so I mean, just to summarize, so if there's any fans who are interested in getting a Star Trek beer, any brewers who would like to take part, anybody who's interested in Star Trek and basically beer, get in touch with you and see what can happen. And it might not work. It might.
Yeah. So a good example. We've already received fan requests for a case here, a case there. There is a pre-order form. What we do is, if we have, say in Ireland, 4 or 5 people wanting to buy 10 flats, we share that information immediately with our Irish manufacturing partner, brewer, and so they can reach out as well. So a lot of the decisions we have where to go for a product launch are based on the feedback from fans.
Okay. So listen, it's a fascinating thing. I'm really looking forward to. I'm hoping to try some myself soon. And yeah, I mean, look, if anybody has an idea, any concept.
I'm going to do a pitch. I guess I should probably do that. So this is one of the Vulcan Ale products that we released. This was originally brewed by Garrison Brewing in Halifax, and it was also brewed by Schmaltz Brewing in New York. And I worked with Yuri from Pravda Beer Theater in the past, and of all things, I have Crazy Cow. This is Vienna lager that we actually imported into Alberta about 3-4 years ago. And during the 50th anniversary of Star Trek, this particular item, which is the Golden Anniversary Ale, and it's a voyage to the Northeast Quadrant. To tell you a fun story before we leave, this particular product was, again, brewed by Schmaltz Brewing in New York. It was launched at the New York 50th Anniversary Mission, New York in 2016. It was very surreal. When we were walking up Times Square, CBS had paid to have the beer launch in Times Square just prior to the product launch in Times Square. So if you imagine walking up and seeing that particular beer bottle above your head in one of the world's most famous iconic places, it brought tears in my eyes. And getting back to Quark's Bar, this is one of my personal favorites, the profit motive. We've taken a look and tweaked it a bit. As I said, we're sharing the profit motive when it comes to this particular project going forward.
Right. Yeah. So again, if there's any brewers, you're always looking to support local. So here's a way to kind of also support local and have a bit of fun at the same time with,
for sure,
loads of photo ops of Klingons and probably tons of publicity as being the only one in your country or in your region who is doing it. So it sounds like a win-win for everybody, really.
I think so. And I thank you very much for your help in Wednesday's interview with Yuri. I guess if anybody, in closing, if any brewer wants to beam down a label as well as a recipe from a Ukraine brewer, they can go to brewforukraine.beer is the website. Already close to 800 breweries around the world have already done so. From our estimate, about $10 million US has been already donated for refugee relief. Not only in the local markets, often there could be a local Ukraine charitable organization helping families that have been displaced by the war. Also, as I think Yuri mentioned, some people are donating directly to brewers that have been affected by missiles within their communities. And of course, we work very closely with the World Central Kitchen. Spoke with Yuri. They're very active feeding families in Ukraine at this point. So that was a logical location that we sent some money as well.
Yeah, that is, it's good that you mentioned that, because that is an important thing, because the brewers supporting Ukraine, I think they did a fantastic job. They really, stepped up earlier in the thing, but it has kind of lost some of the initiative, and I suppose people, it's becoming background noise. So maybe
you hit the nail on the head. So I don't believe, as we spoke earlier this week, I don't believe anybody thought this war would be continuing for a year. It is, and the unfortunate part is, I don't think the brewers. I think most brewers would like to still help, but in their local communities right now, with the high inflation and turmoil in the markets, people losing jobs, it's been really tough. So I do know that's the reason why we're moving into this Star Trek idea, is it would provide these brewers an opportunity to do something unique. Everybody knows the brand, and it will give them an opportunity to hopefully donate some money to a local food bank.
Okay. Well, listen, Vern, thanks a million for your time. I think we leave it there. On that pretty hopeful note, I think, as we go into the end of the year. Hopefully, we're going to have a lot better 2023 than we've had the last 3 years, really.
To everybody who's listening, happy holidays. It's December, and Christmas is only a couple weeks away.
Yeah, something to look forward to. Okay, I'm going to play out a little video here again just to close it all off. Thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Let me press this up, and we'll get it